If yes.
All right, welcome back to the Mentality Mondays Healthy Masculinity Conversation Series, a part of the Mentality Project. I am Chelsea Hill. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm one of the health promotion specialists here at the Well. Today, we're very excited to have Julius Austin, one of our clinical therapists, joining us from the Counseling Center as our guest speaker. We also have our other co-host, Anthony, where I'll pass it off, and he's going to get us started with today's conversation.
Hey y'all, as Chelsea mentioned, I'm the other co-lead / co-host of Mentality Mondays. I'm just going to kick us off with our first question. So Julius, if you'd like to just tell us about yourself and a little bit about your position at Tulane.
Sure. So Dr. Julius Austin, I'm from Lafayette, Louisiana, born in Opelousas, Louisiana. Had some time playing sports as a kid, as well as transitioning into college athlete, professional athlete, which led me down to getting a PhD in counseling, education, and supervision, and kind of being a professor and then transitioning into the clinical setting. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm a clinical therapist in the Counseling Center here at Tulane, but I'm also the coordinator of the Office of Substance Abuse and Recovery. And I'm kind of absorbing the basics program. So I'm taking on students who need support with substance use.
Awesome. Thank you again for being here with us. And I'm just curious, you spoke a little bit about being a college athlete, which led to you getting your PhD in counseling and psychology, but I'm wondering, why do you do the work that you do, and what ultimately drove you to it? Like, what was that like aha moment, or like, this is where my passion lies and this is what I want to see myself for the rest of my life?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I wish it was like a seamless process, right? I wish it was like, yeah, this light bulb happened and I was like, oh, this is where I want to be, But no, it was a complicated series of failures that kind of led me to do this, So I mean, to make a long story short, there's maybe 2 or 3 failures that led me down this path. So the first one was I almost failed. Well, I did fail my final exam in Psychology 101 in undergrad. And I was like, you know what, let me take this psych class because, I want to boost my GPA because I'm an athlete. So let's take this easy, Psychology 101 class. And nope, definitely wasn't easy. Went down to the wire and failed it. And, I went up to the professor and was like, is there anything I can do, to change my grade or to get some extra points? And he gave me this, kind of like this assistantship, helping him do some research, And I helped him with the research, and I was like, the research was dealing with like people and then proximity of space and the relationship and how space informs the relationship. I was like, I need more of this, So I did the experiment, passed the class, and was like, all right, can I take more of this? And that kind of led me down the route of understanding that, there's like this dynamic that exists between all of us, right? So even in this meeting right now, right, I have my own stuff that's going on with like my family back home, with like, the hurricane, all that stuff, and you have your stuff that's going on, right? But in some way, we're trying to figure out how to maintain this relationship between the two of us, right? It's like that in-between space. And that's what got me interested in saying, all right, I want to learn more about developing, modifying, understanding that relationship between humans, right? And then, by doing that, you got to kind of put a toe into the human experience. So that led me down a natural path of going, getting a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. Only reason why I heard about counseling was because I failed an English class and I had to take a remedial English class in the summer. And there was this person sitting in the front row that said, hey, have you heard that there's a counseling program on campus? And I was like, what's counseling? And he was like, oh, well, it's kind of this and that. And I was like, well, yeah, let me look into it. And there was a professor who also played soccer. I was a collegiate athlete, but I was a soccer player. And we kind of hit it off, and he was like, I think you'd be a good fit for it. And I was like, okay, yeah, let me try it. and, very similar to, Psychology 101. It was kind of like I didn't even know this existed, but I'm happy I found it because I love it, right? And I just happen to it's just a natural fit for me, Same thing, getting a PhD. I was literally the last year of my master's program, second semester, and I was going down the path of failing a psychopharmacology class. And I had to meet with one of my professors, and she had a University of Wyoming flyer on her desk. And I was like, well, University of Wyoming, why do you have that? She was like, oh, it's a recruiting flyer for, they're trying to recruit PhD students. And I said, okay, it's probably never going to be me. She was like, no, you should check it out. So I did that, checked it out, and they were like, yeah, you'd be a really good fit for the program. And for some reason, they let me in, and before I knew it, I got in there and I was like, is there any way I can mix in being a collegiate student athlete and like mental health? And they were like, yeah, you can just research that thing. So that became my dissertation, researching, the experience of collegiate student athletes, at a D1 university, and their relationship to, the University Counseling Center, counseling preparation programs. So that was my dissertation topic. So it wasn't like this revelation, when I was like 19 years old, to I want to help people for the rest of my life. It was like a kind of like a ping pong thing, and kind of going with my gut and my instincts.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always appreciate like a story that's like a journey, right? And isn't so linear.
Yes.
Yeah.
It turns to
it's realistic.
Yes, right. Like,
well, so the thing is, I think people will see like, oh, it's Dr. Julius Austin. He must have been super smart to get a PhD, and it's like, no. I mean, I work extremely hard, and that's a combination of like, my dad, my grandfather, my mom, all these people that were in my life that kind of, taught me that you have to work hard to get what you want. So I knew for a fact, oh yeah, you're not the smartest person, but I mean, you'll die on this treadmill before you get off, So that's kind of been my existence, and that's what's propelled me forward.
Yeah, absolutely, and it goes into the message of like hard work pays off, right?
Sure. But that's funny too, because like my journey as an athlete, it's not always true. I can work my butt off all week. I mean, train. I mean, I am in the gym when everyone else is sleeping, and the game comes on Friday and we lose. And it's like, why? Well, because that person was better than you. Like on that day, they were faster and they were stronger. And like to have to come to that realization is one of the most humbling things.
Yeah.
Right. But besides playing in like an alumni game and realizing that like, yeah, you're not 21 anymore. Yeah, that's helpful.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm also just wondering, like, can you give a brief overview of your journey to working with OSAR, or the Office of Substance Abuse and Recovery?
Sure.
It's still new at Tulane, and some of us are new to Tulane. What the office is and your goals for it.
Sure. So I come to Tulane by way of the University of Louisiana at Monroe. I was an assistant professor over there, and my family, my wife works for the DA's office in Baton Rouge, and I wanted to kind of be closer, here. So this job opportunity opened up at Tulane, and to be honest, I looked at the staff. I worked at other university counseling centers before, and they were great. They were really great, but man, Tulane has so beyond my office, right? Tulane has this structure of leadership. And this like kind of like attention to the culture, right? That you work in, that is different than any university I've worked at, right? So that was the thing that kind of sparked the interest in Tulane. So to be honest, man, I went to the website and I said, "Is there anything in mental health related?" And there was like maybe 4 postings, and I applied to each one of them. you know, because I was like, I'm interested in being here, you know. So, you know, this position opened up, and substance use and substance misuse is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, mainly because, you know, of family history with substance use and, you know, the experiences that I've had as a student athlete, my own experiences, but as well as like some friends and some teammates. And then, you know, working in like a community clinic when I was in my master's program, and seeing how pervasive substance use and substance misuse was, and how it, you know, influences people's lives. I was like, you know, this is a perfect fit. So what made it even a better fit was because this office was new, right? So the, you know, this office, OSAR, the Office of Substance Abuse and Recovery, wasn't even it didn't even have a name, you know. So I'm the founding clinician in this office, and it was started by a lot of work, you know, on the back end, you know, by Scott Timms and by, you know, Donna Bender and Alicia, you know, in the well. I mean, Letitia in the well as well. I mean, all these people have put in so much years of work to even get this ideal formulated into a position. So when I got the job, I was in Walmart, and like, you know, Dr. Donna Bender called me, and I think I was getting something for my kids or something. And she called, and she was like, you know, we you know, we'd like to extend the offer to you. I didn't even ask how much I would be getting paid. I said, yeah, for sure, I'm in, you know. And then so I called my mom, and my mom was like, you should probably ask how much you're getting paid. And I was like, oh yeah, I should probably do that, right? So, like, that's how excited I was to kind of be in this position, you know. So I landed here, and it was like an office space with like no decorations, and that was a reflection of the way that the office was symbolically, right? There was a direction, but it really wasn't set in stone, right? So, I mean, building the office literally from the ground up, you're working out the clinical paperwork, the documents, all that stuff, you know, was all on the back end. But what it ultimately resulted in was this office, kind of like this hub that would be kind of like a place for students that are struggling with substances, that maybe are misusing substances, that maybe are in the recovery process, or maybe in the throes of addiction. Students who are questioning, right, if they have an issue with substances. I kind of wanted this office to be a place where anybody can kind of contact me, right, and I can help them, direct them, or support them in really any way possible, right? So essentially, the office works like this. There's a 3 session structure. So the first session is a consultation. The next session would be an assessment session. And then the third session is a follow-up session. So the way to kind of get into my office, you just have to call the counseling center. If you're a student and you're not referred by anybody, call the counseling center and say you want to set up an appointment with Dr. Austin, and they'll set you up with like a 30-minute consultation session. And that's really for us to say, okay, so what's going on for you? You know, what made this so relevant for you? What's your experience like, you know, with substances? And then if the student says that, you know, substances has played a massive role in my life, I'm finding the other place where I want to kind of do something about it, then I invite them to the second session, which is the assessment session. We do an assessment which pretty much covers the breadth of a student's relationship with substances. You know, I mean, from a cultural perspective, from a historical perspective, biological perspective, we really want to create this picture for the student, right? So it's not really met with, you should not drink or use substances. You know, it's really like, okay, if you're going to choose to use substances, right? If that's something that you're going to choose to do, just figure out a way, you know, to make it to where you're not ruining relationships, right? And if you're going to choose not to use substances, then, you know, there's going to be some significant shifts within your friends group, within the way that you socialize when you're not using substances, right? So kind of like talk about those things. So we do the assessment, and then I invite them to a third session, which is the follow-up session. I pretty much give them a rundown of, this is everything that we've learned, and here are some treatment recommendations. So they're not, you know, they're not mandates. It's just recommendations. You know, here are some recommendations that I think would be beneficial for you. So yeah, that's kind of it. Any like follow-up questions on that? I just want to make sure I was kind of clear about that process.
No, thank you so much for giving us a brief overview of OSAR. And also, I think you really broke it down about how to access the resources at OSAR. I don't have any follow-up questions, but
Oh, that's awesome.
I appreciate you talking about how the sessions work and what you can expect. That's great, especially for those who don't know what OSAR is.
Well, so I want to be transparent about that process. Like, so what just happened there was like a series of like 100-something hours of failing at like explaining what the process is, and like having people saying, "Well, I don't know if that works for our office." Like the way that the Office of Student Conduct is set up is that we need to get referral confirmation back, and it's like, "Oh, okay, I don't know how to do that. Well, let's figure that out." So like that's kind of what that process was. That what I just said was very polished, but like questions, even from, departments on campus, from students. So anytime I meet with a student, I always ask them, like, what was this process like for you? Was there anything that you would like within the process of like connecting with me, connecting with the office, communicating back and forth, that like you needed that you didn't get? Because I want this to be almost like a live office that's malleable to the needs of the campus, right? And essentially, I want to be a citizen of the university, so that means that like kind of molding the office to fit the needs to any different department on campus who needs to refer students to.
So great work overall, though, and much needed as well.
Yes. Yes.
I want to say as well, I appreciate the approach, not reprimanding, but more of, if you're going to do it here, be healthy about it, essentially, and know, and just know the consequences and the choices that you can make.
Yo, students, every time I say those words, students are like, what?
Right. They're like, I was ready to get.
Yeah, I was like defensive. I was trying to figure out if I needed to like lie to you, trying to think, what can I say that won't get me in trouble with whoever, So once they hear that, it's like, oh, well, all right, well, this is what I use it for, right? Like I use substances because I'm scared to talk to people in public, It's like, well, what's there? What's underneath that surface of being fearful of speaking out in public? Like, oh, I just had this traumatic event. Well, let's talk about it. Like that. That's kind of the approach that I want to take, as opposed to, why you're using substances. It's wrong. I mean, you're.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so great. I'm really excited for that.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into masculinity specifically now, since we are on the Mentality Mondays conversation series. But I wanted to ask you, what does masculinity mean to you? It's not a trick question or anything. We're just curious. And how does the work that you're doing at the Counseling Center / with OSAR intersect with healthy masculinity and violence prevention? And if that you see it as that.
Yeah. All right. I mean, let's get into it, right? So when you say the word masculinity, men jump out into my mind. So like my grandfathers and my dad, my uncles, and my brother. So I have an identical twin brother who's also a professor of counseling. So we kind of did our journey together. So I grew up within the context of a relationship with another, man, essentially, right? Another a boy, a young man to, young adult to, and us kind of, reflecting our experiences, right? Like it's weird because, you walk into a room and you see somebody that looks exactly like you and shares DNA, but has a completely different experience than you. So that was kind of my life, right? So the way that I would define masculinity is not necessarily like this coherent sentence, but more or less edicts that were like passed down to me. So responsibility is a massive aspect of masculinity, but not just responsibility in a sense of you're responsible for your house and home, but what you're responsible for is the decisions, the choices that you make, and also how it influences other people, right? So that that's one definition, right?
Mhm.
Another word that jumps out to me is flexibility, right? So flexibility in how masculinity will kind of shift once you enter into new roles, right? When I was 21, let's say, right, masculinity to me was very shallow, and this is my experience, right? It's just very shallow, you know. Need to graduate, need to make money, need to provide, need to make my parents proud, you know. Since kind of becoming an adult, which feels weird, but you know, growing older, you know, what I've experienced is that masculinity needs to or the ideal, the notion of masculinity needs to be free, needs to be flexible, and it needs to be malleable, right? So as a man, right, an identifiable man in sex and gender, um, I've shifted, you know, but the way that I think, depending on the, you know, the fact that I got married, right, that shifts a lot of things. You know, I'm the type of person who's like, listen, so me and my wife has a doctorate, she has a Juris doctorate, and we were both in school together, right? I was getting my PhD, she was getting a Juris doctorate, and we got married, right? But I was like, you don't have to change your last name if you don't want to, because, you know, my wife's name is Megan. Like Megan Austin didn't get a Juris doctorate, you know, like Megan Green got a Juris doctorate, you know, so like I know that like you spent, you know, the better part of your life, you know, going through all kinds of trials and tribulations to make it to this point. So I know that names are significant, and I don't want you to feel like you have to adopt mine because of some, you know, past, you know, old-fashioned, you know, rules, you know. But then when she decided to take my last name, it shifts some things for me, right? Because now there's a different meaning to it. Now we both share that name, right? It's a family name, right? And now there's some different definitions that come along with that. So, you know, me as a man, the way that I define masculinity shifted when I had my first kid, right? My first kid was a boy, right? And I happened to have him in 2016, and I'm raising him within this climate where Black men specifically are, you know, are prey, essentially, right? Yeah, physically, but as well as emotionally, you know. And I think it shifts a little bit with his generation. Um, and then I had my second kid, a daughter, right? And it's like, well, God, man. So, you know, how do I define that, right? Because I want her to be, um, you know, emotionally strong, but I also want her to be safe enough to feel vulnerable. So that means that, like, as a man, the way that I define masculinity has to create that space to, you know, be vulnerable and also make her feel like she has to be vulnerable, you know. So that means that I have to be approachable. I have to be accepting, and I have to be willing to shift, right? That ideal of, you know, a man is a breadwinner, a man is powerful, a man is strong, right? To a man can also be strong and vulnerable. A man can also be a breadwinner while also, you know, creating the space for, you know, their partner to you know, carve out their own existence within the relationship, you know. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of like my thoughts on it.
For sure.
Definitely answered.
Yeah. I appreciate the fact that you are vulnerable to share. Like at 21, this is where my mindset was, and like it just shifted as like moving out of the collegiate environment into like what we quote unquote say the real world, and like starting a family and moving through your career and all of that. I think it's great for our audience to hear that. It can change, right? Like we don't have to live in this quote unquote box.
Right.
That society sets up for us.
Right. I think so, and that's a difficult thing as a clinician as well, because I'm in a college environment where, like, you know, I get older, but they stay the same age, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So like, I'm, 34, right? I'll be 35 next year, 36 the next year. And I'll still be seeing 18 to 23-year-olds, right? Unless they're a non-traditional student. So it'll still be almost similarly, right, for an emotional structure or mental structure. So it's hard to be patient in that process, right? It's hard to say, listen, your feelings and your emotions don't matter right now, because when you're 35, you're just going to be worrying about your knees cracking, and like, why am I out of breath climbing these stairs? I work out every morning. Like, why is this happening to me? So it's like, listen, I get that, like, you thought that you were going to marry her or marry him or marry them, but you're 21 and you have no idea what you want right now. That makes the issues of the person that you're trying to help seem so insignificant. And if I was 21 and somebody told that to me, I would be like, you don't know who the hell I am. How dare, because I can't, I don't live in that 35-year-old brain, So that's the tough part about being a clinician in this setting. But I love it. Oh my goodness. The richness of experiences of going from like 1 hour to the next, and like, seeing the lived experience of somebody in this generation of being a college student. And it's exciting.
That's awesome. We appreciate all of this. Can you talk a little bit, and you touched on this a little bit more, like, why does healthy masculinity matter? I think sometimes we use like people see like healthy versus unhealthy or toxic masculinity as buzzwords, but truly, like, why is it important? And specifically, like, why is it important for Tulane students to learn about healthy masculinity?
Yeah. So first off, like, healthy masculinity is relative to the experiences of someone, but it's also relative to, like, how their experiences have defined what healthy looks like, So if I'm going to answer this question, it's going to only be through the guise of my experiences, right? I'm a part of a profession where I get to experience the human condition on an hourly basis. And that hourly experience of the human condition shifts my idea of what healthy masculinity looks like. I mean, y'all, for real, from day to day, So for me, right, why healthy masculinity is important? Because we're human and we need people, because we need people, right? So for me, it's hard to exist within an environment, any environment, where I'm not taking into consideration the other person's needs, the other person's desires, but also the other person's experiences. I think that in and of itself is this vulnerable way of living, but also this like childlike way of discovering the other person's experiences. I think that's what healthy masculinity looks like, right? It's the ability to kind of not necessarily take a step back and like put another person like first, but to realize that, like, I'm human and I have my flaws and I have my stigmas and my vulnerabilities and my stereotypes, and my judgments. Oh my goodness, the judgments that fly out of this head, right, is very real. But also that this other person is human, and that this other person has, feelings and emotions, and they can be hurt because they're also vulnerable like me. So to take that into consideration and to realize that, like, you need other people to exist, it's why it's important for Tulane students specifically, because one, Tulane is such a rich university in a rich, city and a rich community, and Tulane students go out into the world and literally change it, like literally change it. So, when you think about Tulane students specifically, you or at least I would want somebody to represent masculinity, the university, right, in a way that's humble, in a way that's caring, that's vulnerable, and that's accepting. Because I think I also live in a world where I have a son, and not too long from now, he may be a Tulane student, right? And I want to be able to say that I trust, the people that, like, I'm seeing in my office to kind of exist or coexist with this kid that, that I want to, to enjoy life, to feel safe. My daughter as well.
A lot of what you said is real. And so I thank you for touching on why healthy masculinity should matter. And I really hope that the Tulane students that are watching this really heard what you said, because it was it was on point. And so speaking of masculinity a little bit more, and in your perceptions as well of Tulane students and what's happening on Tulane, do you still think that there still is an expectation for masculine identified folks or males to adhere to masculine stereotypes or to fit into the man box? And you could talk about it from a societal perspective or what you witnessed here as a staff member at Tulane, but we'd love to hear your perspective on if things are changing in our society or have not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so I'm just going to think out loud, right? So there could be some like disjointed sentences, but I feel like I kind of need to be vulnerable in this space to kind of get, I guess, my thoughts out. Like, yes, there is still this ideal that you need to fit within a man box here on Tulane's campus, but also in society. And then, no, I think that, this generation of students are aware, are a little bit more systemically aware of, the box and like what all goes into the box and how the box can be extremely unhealthy for relationships, right? So the reason why I say yes is because, there is this pressure, and I'll just speak for myself. There is this pressure as a man, specifically as a Black man, to provide. There just is, right? And there's these stereotypical notions of, you have to provide as a man, you have to be strong as a man, and you have to be, all these stereotypes. And like, I wish I could sit here and say, listen, I'm so evolved intellectually that I don't fit, but nope, I see myself, placing my wife into a box, of like, why isn't the house clean? Now listen, I would never say that to my wife. My wife is an absolute angel and saint, because I know this is recorded and there's a possibility that she could see it. But I can't say that like the thought doesn't exist, right? But then the thought right after that is, well, I mean, if I go outside, the grass ain't cut either. Why do I have to cut the grass, right? It's like you kind of go ping pong, right, back and forth between this. I think that I don't think that we would be doing men or people who identify as male a service if we didn't acknowledge the fact that that box still exists and that those stereotypes and those punishments, if the stereotypes aren't met, are real. The pressure you feel, to be that stereotypical male is there and it exists, right? And I don't think it should be fought, right? But I think that is present, and there's nothing wrong. So first off, like if you fit into like a stereotypical male role, there's nothing wrong with it, right? It's not, there's no negative, right? If that's who you are and that's your truth, then like live it, be that person. And then if you're in a relationship and it's a stereotypical type of relationship, right? Then and that works perfectly for you, great, But I think there still needs to be some some exploration of the fact that that box is real and that those stereotypes exist, and the feelings of being like, am I just being just like my dad or my grandfather? Is that real, right? So then the second part, right? I think here on campus, I think a lot of students are realizing, especially with like women's rights, this culture of understanding and this culture of vulnerability and existence of the spectrum of masculinity and femininity and personhood, and I think that like the acknowledgement of those things, it's what's shifting, right? Maybe not so much like the laws and regulations, all that, but the acknowledgement that those things exist is what's important for me.
Absolutely. And I think it's important. I appreciate the thought process of like thinking out loud and like getting your thoughts out there that way. Because this shows like you're critically thinking about these things, right? And like your lived experiences and what you see versus like the societal expectations put on everyone, right? Like everyone can be kind of fit into a box, but we have to kind of dismantle that ourselves and see what works for us. Earlier you touched on two really important points that have just like stuck in my head. And one, I'd love to get your thoughts on like, what does masculinity look like inside and outside of the classroom? From that perspective. And then also success versus failure, right? Like you brought up the word failure a lot. And I think there's this rigidness to be perfect and fit into like certain roles. So like, how does failure play a role in masculinity or the concept of masculinity?
Yeah. So, all right. So that's a multifaceted question, right? So I'll tackle like the classroom first. So I'm also an adjunct professor at a nearby university. Hopefully I can teach at Tulane one day if I can get into psychology or social work class. That would be dope. But inside the classroom, right, as a male, there has to be some understanding. And as a professor, right, like you got to understand, like, walking into a class, the students are already there. They're sitting, right? I'm standing, right? There's like, people, depending on how comfortable they feel, sit to the front row or to the back row. I was an athlete, so I had to sit in the front row because coach was always watching. So like just the dynamic of walking into class, having a briefcase, knowing the password to the computer, pulling down the projector for a PowerPoint, like that is, I cannot express how powerful that feels, right? And knowing that, I control essentially, right, your life. I would love to say, no, students control that. The work ethic that they put in, really, shows how, much they're in control with their life. And, I didn't give you this grade, you earned this grade, but I'm the one who's creating the syllabi. I'm the one who's picking the textbook. I'm the one who's doing this. So I think in the classroom as a professor, there has to be some understanding or at least some awareness of the power we yield within that classroom. And power is yielded differently when there's a perceived male or female, at the front of the room. And I can only speak from my experience as an African-American male. For some students, I'm the first Black male professor they've ever had, right? Ever. So like they've never had to exist within this experience of me, norm material more than they do, right? Having control over their grade, being a source of like power within that classroom. So for some students, it's a struggle to, rationalize that fact, right? Maybe if it's not outward, but maybe internally, it's like, oh, I didn't realize that I had this stuff bubbling up inside about, feeling this type of way, right? But then again, like for, maybe students of color, in my experience, it's like, okay, so we got Dr. Austin up there, like we about to, and it's like, especially if I'm teaching something on race or multiculturalism, right? It's like, oh, let's get into it. Because, it's like, well, all right, I'm not going to wear my Black Panther t-shirt to this class today, But it's like, there has to be some recognition that there's power that exists, right? And there's power that shifts the dynamic, and that power shifts the way that students relate to you, No matter how laid back I am, no matter how vulnerable I am, no matter how, like, no, listen, God, this is our class, we can kind of mold the syllabi to, I still have that power, and I think I'd be doing the students a disservice by not recognizing and using that power in a healthy way, So then outside of the class, right? Like, it's weird because as somebody who's a professor, but also somebody who's a clinician, you say that like, oh yeah, time stops at 5 o'clock when I get off, but those emails don't stop. Like the student's anxiety about an assignment, or the student's anxiety about, if it's a clinical issue, that stuff still exists, and I'm still accessible to the students because you have my email, right? And it's not like I don't check my email. I see my email. I'm looking at it while I'm like stuffing my face with dinner, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at it, right? And like you try to do this work-life balance, but it's tough, right? Because as a male within my family, it's my responsibility from my perspective to make sure that we're financially secure. So I need to make sure that like I attend to these emails because I also want to keep my job, so it's like there's this balance that I play. And to be honest, I haven't really quite figured that out, you know? So yeah, I would say like maybe the 45-year-old me would be like, oh yeah, listen, this is how we figured it out. At 38, you did this, but right now it's still kind of up in the air for me, right? Now, with regard to failure and masculinity, I think that and this is just my experience, I think that we as men, maybe even particularly Black men, I think there's a realization at a certain age that failure is an inevitability, right? So I think that like that's a fact of life, that it's undeniable. At a certain age, you kind of realize that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think also at a certain age, there is this way that you react to failure, right? So I look at my son who's 3 years old, and he'll fail doing something and he'll burst out in tears, and it's a completely appropriate response to failure, right? But I think there's something that shifts maybe at around 9 years old or 10 years old where it's like, I can fail. I'm allowed to fail, but I'm not allowed to show emotions about failing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because then showing emotions would also be an expression of, insert the word here, weakness, vulnerability, that can exist if I want to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those two are not tied together. I don't think, failure and vulnerability and showing emotions aren't really tied together, right? I think that they can be. I think you can fail and also feel sad. I think you can fail and also feel happy. I'm at a point in my career where I kind of invite failure, right? Like I want to fail, not to the point to where, my job's at risk or my marriage is at risk or, my kids don't like me. But do I want to like try to do this office and like attempt to do like, to see clients within the counseling center and like fail? Yeah, I want to fail because I want to figure out what works and what doesn't work, right? I think that like there's a transition that kind of needs to happen with regard to failure and the way that it's connected to our emotions. That I think especially like men need to give themselves the grace to be able to experience, right? To be able to experience the failure, but also the realization that it's okay to feel upset or sad or vulnerable about this failure. It's okay to want something really bad and fail at it and feel like you're an imposter, like, you're not good enough, to feel super small. It's okay to feel those things and to kind of ride those emotions out, right? Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. I was curious since you mentioned those like keywords that just stuck out to me. So thank you.
Good, because like I've thought about this, but like hearing myself say these things is so surreal, because it's like, man, it took a lot of failure for me to actually, be able to formulate those feelings around the word failure. Because when I was like, 21, or I keep using that as a number, 18, 19, whatever, a failure? I'm not gonna fail. Listen. I was all state, captain of the team. Like you go through this resume of things and it's like, well, that doesn't mean anything. You can still exist within, this experience where you have feelings, like, and you express those feelings to people outward, and those people see the real you as opposed to this like, machine who, only cries in his car,
Mhm. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you again for sharing that. More specifically on substance abuse, wondering if you could speak on the relationship between, I'm going to say this word, unhealthy masculinity, trauma, and addiction. And how do you think like that form of masculinity influences substance abuse and substance management at Tulane?
Yeah, so there's this stigma, right? And there's this process that happens with masculinity and substance use. From my clinical experience, right? This is what I've seen clinically, where, I'll be dealing with, an identified male client who, the process starts with maybe some pain pills. Let's just use that as an example, right? Some pain pills because of an accident. And, you know, they have this inclination of, I probably shouldn't be taking this extra pill, but I need it because I'm in pain, you know? And, you have somebody who's there and it's like, man, you seem off. You're taking like a lot of pills or, like what's going on? No, I'm fine. I'm completely fine. Like everything's good. So like you try to find this balance between how much can I use to kind of numb the pain, but also I found this added benefit. If I can numb that pain, the physical pain, I can also numb a lot of emotional pain as well. So how can I find that balance of numbing the pain and the emotional pain, but also still being able to exist within like the world, you know? And then the tolerance grows, and then the more pills are being taken, and then there's almost this like second life where you're, being deceitful or dishonest to the people that's around you, But like it's like, the people who care about you the most can kind of see when there's some differences and some changes, you know. But yet again, there's this dynamic where I don't want to say anything because I don't want to make this person defensive, you know? So the environment in and of itself kind of, aids, right, in the misuse of the substances. So it can get like really convoluted. And I think that for men specifically, right, this ideal of, show no weakness, or this ideal of show no vulnerability, or this ideal of I don't need help from anyone. I can do it myself. I can't admit any type of need for help, or I'm going to be seen as weak or perceived as weak. Creates a lot of darkness, right? And what I mean by darkness is like dark thoughts, dark emotions. You know, uh, you know this cloud that exists right within the existence in relationships. So I think that like if there is some freedom to be vulnerable with what you're experiencing as a man, I think that substance misuse, right, could be curbed. But I think the idea that you need something to feel different because the way that you're feeling is not okay is what kind of prevents people from seeking help with regard to substances and masculinity, which is super scary, Even as I'm saying it, it's super scary.
Absolutely. I know that we are winding down on some time, and I want to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
So could you share some resources or speak to some resources that Tulane have access to if they are watching and struggling with mental health or any kind of substance abuse issues and kind of navigate?
Sure. So, can look at it in like this kind of like levels type of way, right? So first off, the people that's around you and the people that care for you, right? So whether that's your parents or your friends. So I was a collegiate athlete, so I had a built-in team of 40 guys, that I could go to if I needed to. So, reach out to like your support system, your network, your friends first, right? Because they're the people that care about you the most. And even though sometimes they may not seem that way. So I would start there, right? The second layer would be, a professor, if you feel comfortable with a professor, right? As a professor, maybe I may not be the best clinician in the world, but okay, I have a program chair, and that program chair has a list of resources I can give my students. Let me go ahead and contact the program chair and get back to you, right, on that. That will be something that I would do, right? And then obviously, you can contact the Counseling Center. The Counseling Center is a resource, even if you don't necessarily need mental health help, right? We have people, dynamic, amazing people at the Counseling Center that's willing to kind of be there with you step by step as you try to find the support you actually need, And then there's my office, right? There's the Office of Substance Abuse and Recovery, who you can contact. You don't even need to have a scheduled session or anything, right? You can contact. If I'm in my office, I'll pick up the phone. I've talked to parents for hours, literally. Talked to parents for hours, fielding questions, right? Because it's a vulnerable time for them as well, And then we also have Jacob Goldberg, who's a part of the Well, but who's also the manager of the recovery community on campus. He's a little bit more accessible than I am. You can find his number on the website, give him a call, and he'll be happy to direct you or support you in any way. He's really good because he's a perfect balance of somebody who understands the system of a university, but also a clinician.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those resources.
Yeah.
So lastly, you agreed to be a part of the Mentality Project today. So I want to ask if you could speak on what you would want this form of work to continue to take on at Tulane. If you have any programming ideas, or if you think there's ways that we can do a better job at engaging our masculine identified folks at Tulane, I'd love to hear your perspectives on how we can do a better job at getting this information out and doing this work.
Well, y'all are doing great. First off, having a conversation with me is, I'm pretty humble, so the first thing I thought was, why me? And what do I have to offer, right? I know that's
you gave us a lot today.
I know.
Yes.
I know.
Amazing conversation.
Yes.
I hate to end this.
No, but there's a part of my identity that's and it's even still to this day, right? You can get all the letters behind your name, but I'm it's still a me, really? Okay, I guess. I'll just be myself. But I think to maybe reach out to vulnerable populations on campus, or even unique populations on campus. And I might be biased by saying this, but the student athlete community is something that is sometimes an untapped resource on campus, because we can kind of shield ourselves, right? So maybe not a student athlete specifically, but maybe a coach or a trainer, because their experience on campus is a lot different than a typical student's experience. And to kind of hear the way that they define masculinity as they're dealing with the pressures of being an athlete as well as a student, and maintaining relationships and things like that, would just add a unique voice to a forum like this. Yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Awesome.
Perfect. Will you have any last words for anyone that's watching?
Sure. I guess I'll make them up right now, right? I would say give yourself grace, give yourself the freedom to be vulnerable. Maybe not to the outside world, because that's scary, and I get it, right? And sometimes for some people it is dangerous, quite literally dangerous, to be vulnerable to the outside world. But to be vulnerable within yourself, to kind of admit when you may need help, or you may need time or space or distance from issues, is something that can go a long way. It can give you perspective, which is something that I constantly reevaluate every year. There's no way that I would be if I had to watch myself as an 18-year-old now, I would be who is that person? Who is that person, right? So to give yourself the freedom to know that me at 34 didn't exist when I was 19. So to put the pressure on myself as a 19-year-old to be this 34-year-old self, it's so unfair. It's so unfair, So kind of exist within the moment as well. That's all I got.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us for an episode of Mentality Mondays. I'm sure we could go on for another hour or two. So absolutely, if we continue this in the future, we'd absolutely love to have you again as a guest and continue the conversation.
I'd be happy to. Just let me know when and where, Anthony. I'm there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Awesome.